Hi everyone, I'm going to go through and shade the half face drawing that we started so that you can pause and start and stop this. Remember, I'd like you to try to shade and do the best that you can, and when you turn in your portrait, you can either choose to turn in this one that's shaded, or you can turn in a third one that, or option number 2, which is half a face but with an imaginative side, or you can do option number 3 where the whole thing is creative. But I would like you to try to do one where you shade just as practice and upload both of your final projects to the tab for half a face. I will put the directions also in the assignment tab so you can remember, like, yes, I do need to upload 2 images, unless of course you decide to spend all of your time shading this and making it as close to photographically real as possible. If you spend the full amount of time and you work it up till it looks very real, then you can stop right here, or you can extend the assignment and just go, I don't like it so much, I want to do a second one because I'd like you to grade the creative one. That's fine with me as well. So in that case, you would do 2 instead of just 1. You would show me the original and then you would show me the second one in 2 separate images. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to switch camera view, but I'm going to line up my pencils and make a point to sharpen all of them before I get started, and then to have my sharpener set up so I've got my little trash container that I put my sharpenings in, or sharpener mess in, and I've got eraser out, all the stuff I'm going to need, so I can quickly and not have to stop all the time. I can quickly sharpen and not have to search around or try to push this pencil past its good point, which when you're shading, your pencil really can get worn down fast, and you want to constantly be sharpening it so that you don't have a dull, yucky shaded area. You want the areas to have sort of the same cleanness to them. And I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'll show you what I mean when I'm shading. The first thing I'm going to do is take my 2H pencil and I'm going to cover the whole right side of the face. I'm going to show you my ProStream camera here. Okay. So I'm going to cover the whole right side of the face with 1 layer of 2H, which is going to be my lightest layer. And the reason I'm doing that is because there is no white, bright, as light as a piece of paper anyway, highlights on her face, okay? So we know that her skin tone is not bright white like the paper. So we need to make sure that and I'm just going to kind of lighten up my contours a little bit because I got a little dark in some areas, so that my guidelines, I'm going to kind of erase my guidelines as I go. I drew some lines that went straight across to measure. Okay, I'm still kind of going over my edges and cleaning up, and then going over very, very lightly this side. Okay, remember our mantra is, where is my light? Where is my medium? Where is my dark? It's underneath. I'm putting this underneath just because I have, if you look, remember we did our cartoons underneath, and I can kind of see those lines through the page. So I want to block it with a piece of white paper so that it doesn't show through the paper. Okay, so I'm going to very lightly, even across her teeth, very, very lightly fuzz. And that's the key, is to sort of, it should feel kind of like you're fuzzing, and the line should be fuzzy. You want to keep your pencil as flat to the paper as possible. Okay. Once you get a nice thin layer across everything, then you're going to go back and squint and look at this area on the left. And so if I think about the area on the left, and I'm really looking at it, it has a mask of dark shadows, okay? And what do I mean by that, a mask of dark shadows? Well, if I'm going to take, if I take a piece of tracing paper and lay it on top and then trace around it, it's going to make this mask shape. Let me grab a piece of tracing paper and show you what I mean. See, I've got a big pad here. That will make it, I think, easier for you to understand. So if I look and I'm tracing all of the darkest areas of shadow, when I trace around them, kind of become like a mask on her face. Okay. So let's take a look. So that mask area, those areas of dark, are those concave, sort of pushed in areas of her face that are shadowed. And those are the contours. So when we talk about contour lines and contour makeup, what we're talking about is lines and shadows that sort of push into the page and create depth and dimension. And what we're trying to do is put in our shadow work. So if I flip it this way and take a look at it, that means on this side, I'm going to have a shadow that wraps around the side of her face and then underneath her lips right here. And those areas are going to be dark, just like the area on the left, okay? Any place you would take your fingers and push into the clay is a place where it needs shadow work. So I'm going to constantly be moving from the left to the right, looking back and forth, trying to recreate that shadow shape. You can think about it as putting in contour makeup or shadow work, like almost like blush on the sides of the face. This is probably the first area. This is the part that people get nervous to shade because they're afraid that they're going to be giving her a beard. Start with your lightest pencil so you don't feel nervous about that. And you can just start to fuzz in this shape. Remember, I'm just kind of copying the shape of the other side. And notice that it's a C here with a little circle that's white in the center. So I'm going to go ahead and shade around that white area. And then her shadow work comes up to the edge of her mouth, her lips. And it comes underneath the chin. And I'm just moving around every place I see a dark. I'm going to shade a little more. I've got a little dark underneath her chin. And so my first pass with the pencil, putting the shadow work in, is I'm going to just be looking and taking my hand and kind of going over this side and figuring out what area I'm going to go back into. And then I'm going to lay in my beginning of my shadow work. Notice under here it gets really dark, so I can mark in that I'm going to get really dark there by getting a little bit of pressure. And I know I've got more shadow under there. This is light, but she does have a nice shadow there. I'm going to leave the lips blank for a second. Okay. I'm going to go back to them and I'll tell you a little bit more about them in a second, but let's get this shadow work around her lips first. We want to match the shadow. Notice that the shadow comes and there's a little highlight underneath the nostril, and then the shadow picks back up again underneath her nose. And then we have a nice dark shadow that's next to the side of her nostril on the inside. That's the spherical form, right? Sort of like if you imagine you're shading a sphere, and then it connects right back to this J shape that hooks around the nose, or Y shape. And then she has a highlight at the end, and then it's dark on top. The dark shadow connects here like a letter T. That's going to establish the planes under the eyes, under the nose, and around it. And I'm just balancing those shadows where I see them. Okay, notice I'm moving around the drawing. I'm not getting stuck in one area. Just putting in the darks wherever I see them very lightly. And I'll go back and make some adjustments later, but I'm just putting it in wherever I see them, whenever. I'm noticing it's light here, so I'm going to leave that space and then bring that around. This is like eyeshadow. It's going to come all the way up to the edge of the eye. And remember, we talked about how this is dark, so I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to get really dark out here and along the lid. And that darkness is going to follow around the side of her face. So one of the things we're going to be talking about this semester is how representation matters, okay? Representation meaning that you're showing a variety of different kinds of figures in your class, of different ethnicities, different genders, different sexual orientations. You want to always have a variety of examples that every kind of kid in your class has, and this is the way I like to think about it. You want every kid to feel like they have a hero or a heroine, someone in history that's come before them that is great. And so one of the reasons about 15 years ago I started to use images of African American actresses when we were doing shading was, number one, the students, when the actress, the face I was using was white, I noticed that the students would skip shading and they would just start rubbing immediately. And if you choose a person, a figure that has a richer, darker skin tone, then that's impossible. You have to shade to match the other sides. That was number one. Number two is, I thought it would be interesting because all of the examples that I could find on YouTube of faces that were drawn in proportion and all of the figure models were primarily white. And I thought that that was bad. I didn't think it was a good idea to show only white models in class. So I made an effort to diversify representation. And I thought this would be a good lesson to do that because you could switch up the actresses that you chose or the actors that you chose to draw half the face for and make it contemporary, make it important to the kids, make it somebody that they would recognize. Like this would be a really good year to do Chadwick Boseman, for example, in the classroom. But I love Lupita Nyong'o's face because she has such perfect bone structure. You can really see This shadow is starting to come out a little bit more. So again, I've used only my light pencil so far, and I'm just fuzzing in and building in those shadows, asking myself, where's the light, where's the medium, where's the dark? And I want you to see, it takes a little while to build it up where it needs to be. And I'm just going lightly over those areas wherever I need to build it up more. And at this point, it is very messy, and that's okay. I think one of the things that people who like to draw understand, that sometimes people who are nervous about drawing don't, is that there's a big long period of time when you're shading and when you're drawing where it's just going to look messy, and that's okay. You just have to accept that it's going to look messy for a while, and it's not going to look good until the very end, which is like most things, right? Most things take a lot of practice and a lot of patience before they start to show up and look real. Now, this is the part that people like to skip because they think they're afraid it's going to make her look old. Just put it in. Don't think about it too much. Very, very lightly. Always start with your lightest pencil, and it won't be an issue. Okay, notice I haven't used any medium or dark pencil yet. I'm going to save that towards the end. I'm going to really hold off on it until I need it. I'm going to go over the ears a little bit. I've got some highlights in the ears, so I want to make sure that I shade following that pattern. She's got a nice shadow here. There's a highlight on the inside, so I'm going to skip that and then shade up to the next highlight, which is out here, keeping it pretty simple. And again, I haven't gone up to medium and dark yet. I will get there. At this point, I'm just shading in the abstract shape. When you're drawing the ears, it's good to think of it almost like a shell, like a little tiny shell that you're drawing. If you can see it as an abstract form, it's not as scary to draw, okay? Scary in the sense that, you know, sometimes when I go, oh, I can't draw a face, I can't draw a face, look at it upside down, and then it helps to see it as just a shape, just a shadow. Because remember, you're psychologically tricking your brain into looking at it as something that you're unfamiliar with, that's just a shape like a letter or a number. I'm going to go over it one more time with the light, and I'm going to step up to my HB now. Notice I'm always starting with my lightest pencil, and then I'm building up until I get to my darkest dark, because I can always erase if I need to. If I go into an area that's not dark enough, I can always add more. If I go over an area that's light, I can go back and erase very easily when I'm using my lighter pencil. It's a little trickier when you bump up to the darker ones. Okay. Notice there's reflected light here on the edge. I got a little too dark there. I'm going to pull it back out again, because I don't want to get rid of that reflected light. And again, because I haven't switched to my darker pencil, it's very easy to erase. And I'm not pressing hard at all yet. I will work up to that. Okay, so I'm getting there. Now I'm going to move up to HB. Let's see, where's my HB? There it is. I do need to sharpen it a little bit. I'll move my eraser. And always keep sharpening. Don't be shy about that. My pencil sharpener's acting stinko. Let's try this one. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to step up to the darker, and I'm going to go in. I'm going to start doing some smaller areas like the lips that have a little more contrast between light and dark. You can see that the lips have a big highlight, okay, here, and then next to it, it's darker. So I'm going to go ahead and step it up with my HB, and I'm going to leave that highlight where it belongs, and then I'm going to pull that medium and dark where it needs to be, but I'm going to leave that little highlight shape, and it kind of looks like a little inchworm or something. It's got some texture out there, and then it's dark along the edges, darker than the skin around it slightly, and it's darker underneath, but I've got that highlight there. I'm going to leave it and give it some of that texture that I can see. And I'm just matching where the dark goes on one side and copying it to the other. And I'm tightening up a little bit. Okay. Noticing here it's dark all the way to the edge, and then there's highlight at the top, so I'm going to put that dark in all the way to the edge. I'm using my HB, so it's going to get a little darker than the skin, which I want. And again, I'm just fuzzing in the shape. I notice it's kind of an almond shape here. I'm going to use that same shape where it's dark, and it's going to get darker right here by the edges, and I'm going to lighten up where there's a highlight until I match what's on the other side. I can't really see much about her teeth. I can see like a little tiny shadow. That's all I'm going to put in there. And then I'm going to pick up that shadow right above the top of the lip, because that's going to exaggerate the highlight. Okay. Now I can go back over my darks and integrate those in a little more with my HB pencil. And I'm going to notice that it's darker a little bit around the edges here. I'm going to go ahead and put in widen that shadow a little bit next to the side of her nose. Notice there's no line here, it's just all shadow work. I'm just looking, the shape of the shadow is a little bit more triangular because this light comes out, so I have to put that triangular shape in a little bit more in order for it to pop. Okay, and notice it's gonna look bad for a while before I get enough of those darker shapes and darker pieces in for it to integrate into the light and the medium. The trick is not to stop when it looks bad or to freak yourself out. Instead, to just keep going. Okay, now I'm gonna go back in and add a lot more of these darks in the tiny corner that I see here. I'm gonna put this dark in and then keep that little highlight for the eye where it belongs. And I can really even add a little pressure here if I want to for this part. And I'm going to pull out the eyebrows, but I'm going to just keep them generally fuzzy because it's a pretty fuzzy photograph. And I'm going to keep it, I'm not going to fill it in solid. I'm just going to kind of shade it back and forth and keep it a little sketchy so it mimics that hair texture, the surface of hair. Texture is basically the surface of what something feels like when you look at it. I'm coming around the bottom because I can see that she's got some eye makeup on. And then she's got a very pronounced eyelid here that's close to the top of her eye, a shadow that runs next to the top of her eye, a little tiny corner of the eye here. Okay. Notice I'm not going to add the eyelashes into the very end. I'm going to wait on those. But this really dark shape that's on this side, I need to expand that a little bit so that it matches the other side. And I'm going to notice that mine is a little small on this side, so I'm going to expand it a little bit more. And then it kind of wraps around a little underneath her eye. I'm going to bring it out a little more there too. It feels like that's enough for right now. I'm going to go back and do the sides of her head. We talked about it being a mask. When you squint at it, it almost looks like a kabuki theater Japanese mask form, or like a stencil tag. If you've ever seen any stencil tagging that is a portrait or an Andy Warhol silkscreen, it has that pattern of light, medium, and dark that's very abstract. It almost looks like a mask of abstract shapes, just like the tracing we were working on. So we're just going back and we're looking for that abstract dark, keeping the light where it belongs. Remember, I have light value over the whole thing, so I don't have to worry about doing the lights. I can just go back into the darks where they need to be now. Remember, I've stepped up to medium. Coming around the sides. I'm going to bring this back up again, even more. I know people are always afraid that it's going to look like she has a beard, but remember, it's just going to go into shadow and it actually thins and contours her face. This is why makeup was literally invented. It was invented to paint in these shadow forms to make the face look thinner and more sort of sculptural on camera, because every time you put a dark concave section in, it literally makes the light that's next to it pop off the page. So the key is to have a light, a medium, and a dark, and it's that dynamic relationship of those three things that creates form. And form is the feeling of depth and reality and realness, like something is round, you can touch it, it's three-dimensional. That's what we mean when we say form. I'm going to go back over this a little more. I'm going to notice that there's like a little shadow on the inside of the earrings. I'll put that in just barely. Keep the outside kind of light. It's going to tuck it behind her chin a little bit because she's got that reflected light next to the edge of her head. And then that shadow is going to come and push that dark side of the earring back behind her chin and neck, or actually it's your cheek, really. Okay. Then, and notice it's not going to be exactly the same. That's fine. Okay, I'm going to come in here, put that shadow in. I'm going to start to fill this in. And because I'm now going to start to step up to a darker dark, instead of do one light coat of my HB, and then I notice it's getting really darker here, so I'm going to switch up and go to 2B now, so that makes it even easier to shade. Or I could use my layout pencil, which also is going to give me a really rich, dark, dark. And actually, I think I'm going to do that because I like my layout pencil. Extra black. It gives you a nice, it's not as shiny too, which is really helpful because you're trying to get a dark shadow on there and you don't want it to be shiny. That solid graphite shine can make everything look wrong, which we don't want. So wrong in the sense that the darkest parts should be dark. They should not have any shine on them. So that happens if you press too hard. You get what we call graphite shine on the surface, and we're trying to avoid that. So we want to, again, fuzzing with the pencil. You can use circular marks. You can use linear marks. It doesn't matter because these marks are going to create a web across the surface. And you're just going to keep building it up until the texture or that area that we're shading is as dark as this side. So you want to keep going and back and forth. I can tighten up a little bit with my pencil. I'm kind of doing a circular mark for the hair because I know that that closely mimics hair texture. And again, it totally depends on the texture of the hair that you're drawing, what kind of marks that you'll make. But in general, I just want to fuzz this in as dark as I can without pressing too hard. Notice it gets a little lighter by her temples, and we're going to get a little darker up here. I'm going to continue to sort of keep filling in. And you'll notice that the edges of the hairline, although they're clips, they're organic. So you want to make sure that you don't have a real harsh outline around the edges, that her hair seems to blend into her skin a little bit, so that it's, you want to kind of even go over the edge a little bit to integrate it to the other, into the skin tone. You don't want a really heavy dark line around the edge of the head. It looks kind of silly when you have that. Silly, or not silly, but it doesn't look real. So we want to mimic reality as much as possible with this one, as closely as we can. Remember, this is our observational drawing, and it's teaching us how to be persistent, right? Because artists have to be persistent. It takes a little while to get something done to the quality that you want it, whatever the process is. And one of the goals in this class is to slow down until we get it where we want it, and to be patient with ourselves, because it actually never takes as long as you think it's going to. It always is a little faster usually. Once you get the rhythm, it really is like a rhythm. You're going into a zone when you're shading or drawing or doing anything that requires craftsmanship. And craftsmanship is one of those things that you just can't fake. You got to put your time in, do your best, and it really shows. The toughest part about drawing is to get over your fear that it's not going to look right. And I always tell students it's almost like you have to ignore that sort of horrible voice in your head that tells you this is too hard, I can't do it. Instead, just ignore it, listen to yourself and say, you know what, I'm just going to try. Let's see how it goes. And sometimes it turns out a lot better than you think it's going to. And then sometimes it doesn't, I get that, but sometimes it really does. Okay, I'm going to go back into the eyes one more time. Now go back and pull out the eyebrows a little more. And I'm going to squint to see if I'm missing any major darks. And I'm going to go one time through here because that's really important. This little area right here next to the nose and the corner of the eye is going to shape how much her nose pops off the page, whether it looks flat or sculptural. And we want it to look as sculptural as her nose is in real life. Sculptural meaning three-dimensional. 3D or round or like it's popping off the page. Okay, and it just takes patience and time. Now, the last thing we're going to do, I can spend a little more time on the ears if I want, because there shouldn't be any blank white spots. I'm going to go over anything that looks blank and white like that. I'm going to take a squint, look at it this way. Now I'm going to add the eyelashes in, but notice they're irregular. So I don't have to worry about getting them perfect. They're just going to be connected to this dark shape that's on the side of her face, and they're randomly sized. Okay? Less is more with eyelashes. People always overdo them. Less is more. Okay? And that's it for the first part. So this is as much as I expect you to do for a Lupita Nyong'o. So I'm not sure how many minutes that was, probably about 30 or 40 minutes. It depends on how long it takes you to build up the shadows and values. And I can sit here and keep building until I get it exactly like the photo. I could spend all night on this if I wanted to really make it precise. But this is about the level of finish that I'm going to ask you to try to get to. And again, if you're struggling, do the best you can. Put in your 35, 40 minutes. You've already put in about 35 or 40 minutes. So I want you to give it at least your best effort to show me that you've tried. Once you get enough of the values on the page, you can start to really look to see where you've missed things, if it needs any more work in an area, if something gets lost. But the thing I want you to notice is that it is a drawing, okay? It's not going to be perfect. It's going to have marks on it. That's fine. That's the point, okay? We want it to look like a drawing. Okay, so that's for the first drawing practice. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the second drawing, if you choose to do one. If you feel like, okay, this isn't my best, I want to try something else in order to make sure I've shown that I've put in a certain amount of effort. You can do a couple of things. You can take, if you want to, and remove this from one side. We just use glue sticks, so it's very easy. I can do the half a face version where I'm going to glue stick her face back down, and this time I'm going to make up an imaginative side here, and I'm going to use, all of my materials to play around with it. It's one way to deal with the assignment. It's just to do half, where it's half imaginative. So in this case, I can use any materials I want. I can play with my colored pencils. I can do a layer of watercolor if I want, and then draw on top of it to go back into it. You're just going to be playing on the idea of the face and thinking about the theme here, and whatever it is that you want to do. You can do something more cartoony. You can change the shapes of things. You can focus on abstraction if you want to make her face into anything you want, okay? So what I'm going to talk to you about a little bit is how to layer your colored pencils and how to do it in different ways, both on top of watercolor and then on top of just paper itself. So one of the first things I like to do is to think about what my color palette's going to be, and what I want it to feel like. And I'm thinking I want to make her face sort of look abstract, like maybe a leaf or some kind of plant that's growing. I don't know why, but it's so hazy and shady out there today. I think I want something that's going to look vibrant. So I'm going to use like maybe pink, orange, red, like all my warm colors for the maybe floral parts, and then maybe this for the leaf parts, okay? So whatever the shape is, whatever your plan is, doesn't matter, it's up to you, but I'm gonna kind of mimic somewhat realistically the shapes that I see, but I'm gonna add my own sort of version of it. So I'm gonna imagine her face is showing up in the middle of the forest, or in the middle of, in the leaves here. It's kind of like the example we looked at when we were looking at the Samela Lewis, that's her face was in the tree. So again, I can layer my green over everything if I know where the green's gonna be. And I'm gonna imagine the top of her hair is the top of the flower. Doesn't matter. So just like you used your pencil, you can use your color pencils and cover everything to give yourself a nice base tone. Colored pencils layer just like pencils. They're slightly different, but they have the same sort of ability to create integrated forms. And so I'm just going to carefully start pulling out the individual leaves and playing around with that. Now, if I want to make my green richer and darker so that it shows up more, I can start by layering a second color in after I've got my base color down. And as I'm just lightly fuzzing me move this down a little so I can focus it a little more. Getting a little dark in here. Let's see what happens when I pull this down. There we go. This is my super fancy tripod. I'm just kidding. It is a boom mic stand. So, all right. So hopefully that makes it a little easier. So I'm going to take my green and then I'm going to add, in order for it to pop more and make it darker, maybe a richer green, I'm going to do a layer of light blue. And then I'm going to actually go into an opposite color, which is a color that's very different. So instead of this cold green, I'm going to go into like and add a fire color, red or orange, to make that green blue look even richer. So I'm going to lightly take the blue, and I'm going to go back over my green. It'll give me a nice rich green also, so it doesn't look so flat. And I can vary the value, making it darker in some areas and lighter in some areas. And the eye really loves that. Whenever you kind of mix colors, the eye loves the way that that looks. And then I can go back if I want to with my red or my brown and really pull out and add that in where I want it to be darker. And notice that even though it's red here, it's going to read as a black or a brown color. And if I layer it underneath the green, it's going to integrate lightly into the green, and that'll give me a nice long or nice dynamic range of colors. So one of the things you want to think about when you're shading with colored pencils is how to build up the values so they're exciting to look at. So it's not just like using crayon, because you can do a lot more with colored pencils than you can with crayon, because it gives you a little more precision. You can also just add black if you want to kind of pull shadows out that way. But I always like to use black at the very end and just a little bit, not a lot, because you'll get a more dynamic range if you instead focus on the other colors in the color wheel. So I can keep building these things up. I can change colors if I want for things like eyes. I can change and exaggerate shapes, just like we talked about the cartoon shapes. So her shape of her eye was very much like it's flat on the bottom, right? And then it sort of flared up and became eyelashes on top. So maybe I can play with that a little bit as a shape. And again, anything you imagine is fine. There's no rules about what this needs to look like. It's your idea, your inspiration, your creative expression. You can use any materials you want. And I want to encourage you to be creative. There's not even any rule that has to be on paper. My daughter is doing an embroidered portrait of her face for her art class right now, and it's quite lovely. It's a really clever idea. And her teacher encouraged them to use non-traditional art materials because they don't have any materials in the class yet. So she's going to a public school and they haven't been able to distribute those materials to students. So she's allowing them to use whatever they can find around the house. And that's one way to approach this as well, because you can let your imagination go wild. Okay, so I can sit here and play, exaggerate. I can change colors, whatever I want in order to build my right side and make it more dynamic and exciting. For your creative portrait, I'm going to ask that you don't leave any white paper at all, that you consider how you're going to deal with the background as well as the face shape itself. Think about the whole page, every part, okay? So that it's not neglected, so that it's all considered. And you think of that as part of the challenge, is how you'll integrate the areas around. And maybe I'm thinking about this as like, this is sort of organic leaf shapes, and maybe this all outside becomes like a flower, and I can change colors and switch up to pinks and oranges and purples on the outside. But I'm considering the whole paper and thinking about my theme, not leaving any blank paper. Okay. If I'm a little impatient and I want to, well, I don't know if impatient is the right word. If I prefer watercolor, what you can do is, do a combination. You can watercolor in the background and then use color pencils, or you can do the whole thing in watercolor if you want, and play around with your watercolor sets. We haven't done any formal watercolor. We're going to have a lesson that we cover the color wheel on watercolor, but feel free to experiment. One of the things that's nice about watercolor is you can do it underneath everything, let the paper dry, and then use the color pencils on top. And so for something like a large area that's like this, I can fill that all in with watercolor and then go back with the color pencils, and it's no big deal. So that's one way to consider doing it, is to just have an area that you're filling in and then go back and add details more and more as you go, in order to make it more and more interesting to you, to make a more dynamic and interesting piece. So I'll show you what I mean about how you can use the watercolors. So I've got my watercolor palette. I said I was going to do sort of a floral shape out here. I'm going to grab a couple. These are my watercolor set. It's actually, yeah, my watercolor sets. Or we're going to use acrylic. Oh, maybe we should use the watercolor instead. Doesn't really matter. What I'll do is I'll use acrylic and then add a lot of water to it instead of my watercolor palette. How about that? Here we go. I'm just going to use a little bit of red acrylic and add a lot of water to it, which will have kind of a similar effect. Okay, just a little bit. And I'm going to put a lot of water on my palette. I've got my little jar of water here. And I can thin out that paint. Because remember, I want to thin out my acrylic to the point where I'll be able to see the paper underneath it when I'm ready to draw on top of it. So I don't want it to be solid red. I want it to be kind of like a pink. I can cover it, and then remember I'm going to go back over this with colored pencil later. So I'm just going to let it dry. I'm using a flat brush, which gives me this ability to kind of find the corner. Notice I can get a nice long edge. And I'm just using the water to very lightly pull the paint. And I'm using very watered down paint for this. I'm not getting too wet. I want it to just be kind of one light coating. And then I can go back with watercolor, or excuse me, I can go back with my color pencil and add detail. But that'll give me a base coat so that I maybe don't have to use as much colored pencil in order to achieve the effect that I want. Okay. I don't want to get the paper too wet. Okay, so that's kind of my base coat. And then I'm going to go back in and wait till that dries, and I can add more details in order to kind of make it be interesting to pop off the page. So I want to encourage you to, for the second one, to experiment, to try a bunch of different things, to play around, to see what you can make, and to express yourself and be experimental. Now, if this bugs you to have it be half and half, you don't have to do it as just half and half. You can actually take and cover the whole paper with your design, and that's fine too. It's totally up to you. You have options. I want you to think creatively and solve the problem in whatever way you want to. It doesn't need to resemble her face at all. I would just like you to attempt shading and then work on where you feel you could be the most successful or the most engaged and interested in the lesson, because I want you to direct your own learning. Thank you so much. I'll see you in class, and I'm gonna send this out to everybody as a video so that you can watch it before class and hopefully finish your shading before class starts so that we can move on to lesson planning this week, which is something that I'm very, very excited about.